The woman at the trading post had learned to lie in 4 languages, and every traveler believed her because politeness demanded it. Hessa Korvan stood behind the worn wooden counter when the Drevik merchant asked if she was well, and she answered in flawless Drevik that yes, she was fine, thank you for asking. When the Suler caravan master inquired after her health an hour later, she switched tongues seamlessly and assured him she was perfectly fine. The Karish traders got the same response in their clipped consonants, and the occasional common-tongue settlers heard it in words they recognized from home. 4 languages, 4 identical lies, delivered with the small smile of a woman who knew exactly what people wanted to hear. She had been doing this for 3 years at the Crossroads trading post. Ever since she had walked away from a funeral pyre, she should have prevented and found work where her gift for languages made her indispensable. The post sat at the junction of 4 territories, and Hessa was the only person within 50 miles who could negotiate a grain price in Suler and explain tariff agreements in Drevik before the sun reached noon. Her employer, a shrewd human named Garrett who cared more about profits than prejudice, paid her fairly and asked no questions about the shadows under her eyes or the way she sometimes stopped mid-sentence when the wind came from the north, from the direction of the mountain pass where her brother had died. The trappers came through every few weeks, rough men who smelled of pine sap and animal musk, trading pelts for supplies. Most ignored her beyond the transaction. A few made comments about orc women that she pretended not to understand regardless of which language they used. One brought her courtesy and silence in equal measure. Warren Holt never asked if she was fine. He came on a cold morning in late autumn, when frost painted the windows white and the trading post smelled of wood smoke and drying herbs. Hessa was tallying inventory, her fingers flying over the abacus while she mentally translated the Karish merchant's order into Garrett's common tongue ledger. Warren set his bundle of fox pelts on the counter without preamble, waited while she finished her calculation, then met her eyes with the steady patience of a man who had spent half his life waiting for animals to walk into traps. "Good morning," she said in common, reaching for the pelts to assess quality. "Morning." His voice was low, economical. He watched her examine the furs with the same quiet attention he gave everything, not staring, just observing. When she named a fair price, he nodded and counted out his supply requests with his usual brevity. Salt, coffee, fish hooks, lamp oil, gunpowder. She gathered the items, wrapped them efficiently, and completed the transaction in near silence. Most customers filled quiet spaces with chatter. Warren seemed to prefer them empty. He was halfway to the door when he paused, turned back, and said, "The wind's picking up from the north. Storm coming tonight. You have enough firewood stacked?" Hessa blinked. "I have enough." He studied her for a moment with those pale gray eyes that seemed to notice things others missed. Then he left without another word. She stood behind the counter, unsettled in a way she could not name. He had not asked if she was fine. He had asked about firewood. Such a small, practical thing, and yet it had been more genuine concern than she had received in months. That night the storm hit hard, and Hessa discovered her woodpile was not enough after all. By dawn she was rationing, and when Warren returned 3 days later with a sled bearing split firewood that he stacked behind the trading post without being asked, she felt something crack in the careful wall she had built around herself. "You did not need to do this," she said, following him outside into the pale winter sunlight. "Needed doing." He brushed bark chips from his gloves. "You would have frozen. I would have managed. Would have been uncomfortable managing." He met her eyes again, and there was no pity in his expression, no expectation of gratitude, just that same steady observance. You do not have to say you are fine when you are not. The words struck her like a physical blow. She opened her mouth, cycling through languages in her head, searching for the right deflection. But Warren was already walking away toward the tree line, his long stride eating up the snowy ground. Winter deepened. The trading post saw fewer visitors, sometimes going days between customers. Garrett spent most of his time in the back room with his ledgers, leaving Hessa to manage the front. The silence should have been peaceful, but instead it left too much room for memory. Her brother Dravik had died 3 winters ago in the mountain pass, caught in an avalanche while trying to reach a settlement that desperately needed medicine. She had been the one who spoke all the languages, who could have negotiated for a guide or convinced someone to help. But she had been away translating trade agreements and had not known he needed her until it was too late. She buried herself in work, organizing inventory that did not need organizing, practicing grammar in a 5th language she was teaching herself from a book. When Warren came through on his rounds, she found herself watching for him, listening for his quiet knock on the counter. He never asked how she was. Instead, he asked questions that required real answers. Had the roof held during the last storm? Did she need help moving the heavy flour barrels? Was the chimney drawing properly? He fixed the chimney without being asked, appearing one morning with his tools and climbing onto the roof while she watched in bewilderment from below. The draft was pulling wrong, he said when he came down. Could have started a fire. I did not notice, Hessa admitted. You have been distracted. Not a question, just an observation. He cleaned his tools with methodical care. Something weighing on you. She could have deflected in 4 languages. Instead, she found herself saying, "My brother died 3 years ago, this week." Warren stopped, gave her his full attention. "I am sorry. It was my fault." The words escaped before she could stop them, hanging in the cold air like visible breath. Why do you think that? Not a platitude, not a dismissal. A genuine question. Hessa wrapped her arms around herself, feeling the weight of tusks she usually forgot about, aware of her green skin in a way she had not been in months. I should have been there. I speak languages. I could have helped. But I was working and he went alone and the mountain killed him. Warren was quiet for a long moment, watching her with those perceptive eyes. Then he said, "Mountains kill people. Not sisters who were doing their jobs elsewhere. You cannot translate away an avalanche." The simplicity of it, the complete absence of false comfort, made her throat tighten. Everyone said the same thing at the time, in 4 different languages. But you did not believe them. No. And you do not believe me now. No, she whispered, "All right." He picked up his tool bag. "But it is still true whether you believe it or not. And carrying it alone will not bring him back." He left her standing in the snow, shaking with something that might have been anger or grief or the beginning of release. After that, Warren's visits became more frequent. He brought her things. A fox pelt too fine for trade that would make warm mittens, a sack of walnuts from trees near his cabin, a small jar of honey. He never made a production of it, just set them on the counter with his usual brevity and moved on to business. But Hessa began to understand that this was his language, more fluent than any words she knew. Each gift was a sentence. Each repaired thing was a conversation. She started paying attention to his silences, reading them the way he read hers. The way he paused before answering meant he was choosing his words carefully. The slight tightening around his eyes meant he was worried, but would not say so. The way he oriented himself toward the door meant he was giving her space to speak or not speak as she chose. It was terrifying being seen that clearly. It was also addictive. Spring came slowly, reluctant. The first traders of the season arrived with muddy boots and complaints about the roads. Hessa translated grain prices and tariff updates, her mind only half engaged. The other half was listening for Warren's footsteps, wondering when he would come through again. When he finally appeared, he looked tired, shadows dark under his eyes. He set his pelts down, ordered his supplies, and completed the transaction with even fewer words than usual. Hessa caught his wrist as he turned to go. "Are you fine?" she asked, and realized she had never asked him before. Warren looked down at her hand on his wrist, then up at her face. A smile ghosted across his mouth, there and gone like morning mist. "No, but I will be." "What is wrong?" Trap line got raided by a bear, lost 2 weeks of work and had to relocate everything. He shifted his pack on his shoulder. "Long month. You should rest." "I will, at my cabin." He did not pull away from her grip, just stood there, patient as always. "Why do you ask?" "Because you always ask me." The words came out softer than she intended. "Because you notice things, and I wanted to notice too." Something shifted in his expression, a wall coming down that she had not realized was there. "You notice more than you think. I rehearse what people want to hear." "It is not the same thing." "No," Warren agreed. "But you are learning." He left, and Hessa stood behind the counter with her hand still warm from his wrist, wondering when exactly she had started falling and why it felt both frightening and inevitable, like watching spring melt winter ice. The season turned. Traders came and went. Hessa translated negotiations and smiled in 4 languages and stopped saying she was fine unless she actually was. Warren came through every 2 weeks with clockwork regularity, and slowly, gradually, they began to talk. Real conversations, not just observations and silences. He told her about his cabin in the northern woods, about the rhythms of the trap line and the solitary peace of the forest. She told him about growing up in an orc settlement near the southern border, about discovering her gift for languages, and the way words could build bridges or walls depending on how you used them. She did not tell him about her brother for a long time, not the full story. But Warren was patient, and eventually one evening when he stayed late to help her move inventory, the words spilled out. How Dravik had been reckless and brave. How he had gone into the pass because someone needed help and he could not turn away. How she had been 50 miles distant negotiating trade agreements in Dravik when the avalanche came down. Warren listened without interrupting, sitting on a flour barrel while she paced and talked. When she finally fell silent, he said, "He sounds like someone who made his own choices." He was 23, too young for those choices to kill him, maybe, but they were still his. Warren leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "You think you should have saved him, but you cannot save someone from their own courage, and he would not have thanked you for trying." Hessa stopped pacing. "You did not know him." "No, but I know you." He stood, crossed the room to her. "And I know you have been punishing yourself for 3 years for not being able to prevent an act of God. Dravik went into that pass knowing the risks. You were doing your job. Neither of those things is wrong, and they are not your fault. Everyone keeps saying that, because it is true." Warren's voice was gentle but firm. "And because watching you carry this is harder than watching the winter." The words hit her like a fist. "You hardly know me. I know you say you are fine in 4 languages when you are drowning. I know you work yourself past exhaustion rather than sit still with your thoughts. I know you are kinder than you need to be and braver than you believe." He paused. "And I know I want to hear you speak in your mother tongue, not the languages you use to build walls." Hessa stared at him, heart pounding. "Why?" "Because I think the real you, the one under all the translations, is someone I would like to know better." He held her gaze. "If you will allow it." She could have deflected, could have smiled and changed the subject in any of 4 languages. Instead she said, in the orcish tongue she had not spoken in years, "I do not know if I remember how to be real anymore, Warren's expression softened. Then you can learn, with someone who will not mind the awkward parts. You do not speak my language. No, he agreed. But I am learning to speak yours. He reached out, let his hand hover near hers, giving her the choice, the one under all the others. Hessa took his hand, felt the calluses from trap chains and axes, the warmth of him. I am scared, she said in common. I know. Warren squeezed her fingers gently. But I am patient, and I am not going anywhere. It was not a declaration of love. It was better than that. It was a promise of presence. And Hessa, who had spent 3 years speaking every language but her own truth, felt something in her chest unlock. They began carefully. Warren started staying longer after his trades, helping with heavy work and sitting with her in the quiet hours. Garrett, shrewd as ever, raised an eyebrow but said nothing, just made himself scarce when Warren was around. The spring traders gossiped, because humans always gossiped about orc women and human men, but Warren had a reputation as someone who did not tolerate disrespect, and one hard stare from him was enough to silence most comments. Hessa found herself smiling more, real smiles that came from somewhere genuine. She taught Warren phrases in her mother tongue, simple things at first, greetings, gratitude, observations about the weather. He repeated them with careful precision, his accent terrible but his effort sincere. In return, he taught her to read the forest signs he used on his trap lines, how to identify animal tracks and predict weather from the sky. You do not have to learn my language, she told him one afternoon when they were sitting on the trading post steps, watching the sun paint the western mountains gold. I want to, Warren said. I want to hear you speak without translating first. I want to understand when you finally say something true in the words that fit it best. Hessa leaned against his shoulder, a gesture that would have been unthinkable months ago. You already understand me better than anyone. Some things need to be said in the language they were born in. He covered her hand with his. I want to be ready when you are ready to say them. Summer arrived in a rush of heat and green. The trading post bustled with activity, and Hessa worked long days translating disputes and negotiating contracts. Warren's trap line shifted to summer patterns, and he ranged farther, sometimes gone for 3 weeks at a stretch. They wrote letters in the interim, his simple and direct, hers growing gradually more honest. She told him things she had never told anyone, about the weight of being useful but not seen, about the loneliness of speaking every language but her own. He wrote back that he saw her. That distance did not change that he was learning her mother tongue from a book he had acquired from a traveling scholar. The thought of Warren sitting in his remote cabin, carefully sounding out Orcish vocabulary by lamplight, made her chest ache with something she was not quite ready to name. When he returned in late summer, lean and sunburned, he greeted her in halting Orcish. I missed you. Hessa's breath caught. The accent was still atrocious, but the grammar was perfect, and he had clearly been practicing. You learned that from a book, and practiced with a trader who passed through my area. Old Orc man thought I was insane. Warren smiled, rare and genuine, but he helped anyway. Why? The question escaped before she could stop it. Warren set down his pack, stepped close enough that she could see gold flecks in his gray eyes. Because I want to hear your answer when I ask you something important, and I want to know you understand that I understand. What question? Her voice came out barely above a whisper. Not yet. He touched her face, gentle, giving her time to pull away. When she did not, he added in careful Orcish, when you are ready, I will know. The summer stretched on. Hessa found herself thinking in her mother tongue more often, the language of her childhood resurfacing after years of disuse. She caught herself almost saying things to Warren in Orcish before translating, then realized she did not need to translate. He was studying, learning, meeting her halfway across the bridge of language in the autumn when the leaves turned and the first cold winds blew down from the mountains. Warren asked if she would come see his cabin. "I want you to see where I live," he said, "if you are comfortable. No expectations, just to share it with you." Garrett gave her 3 days away from the post. She packed carefully, nervous in a way she had not been nervous in years. The hike took most of a day, following Warren through forest trails that seemed invisible until he pointed them out. His cabin sat in a small clearing beside a fast-running creek, solid and well-built, with a covered porch and glass windows that spoke of patient craftsmanship. Inside it was spare but comfortable, everything in its place. A large bed with thick quilts, a stone fireplace, shelves lined with books and carving projects, supplies organized with military precision. It smelled like pine and wood smoke and Warren, and Hessa felt something settle in her chest. "It is beautiful," she said. Warren looked pleased. "I built most of it myself. Took 3 years." He set about making tea with economical movements. "It gets quiet in winter, but I like the quiet." "I know." Hessa explored the small space, touching things gently. A half-finished carving of a fox, a battered copy of a book on forest management, a newer book with Orcish script on the cover. She picked up the last, recognizing it as a grammar text. The pages were dog-eared, covered in Warren's neat handwriting. "You really have been studying," she said, feeling her throat tighten every night. Warren brought her tea, their fingers brushing. "I am not fluent, but I am trying." "Why?" the question again, but this time she thought she knew the answer. Warren set down his own cup, took both her hands in his. Then in slow, careful Orcish, he said, "Because I love you, and I want to hear you say it back in the language of your heart, not the languages you use to protect yourself." Hessa's vision blurred. She had rehearsed "I am fine" in 4 languages for 3 years, had become fluent in deflection and defense. But this, the truth she had been carrying since spring, had no translation that fit. It needed to be said in the tongue she had abandoned, the one Warren had spent months learning in lamplight solitude. "I do not know if I can," she whispered in common. "You can," Warren said, steady and sure. "When you are ready. I told you I am patient." That night they lay in his bed, fully clothed, her back against his chest and his arms around her waist. Safe, warm scene. Outside the creek rushed over stones, and somewhere in the forest a night bird called. Hessa drifted in the space between sleep and waking, feeling Warren's breath steady against her neck in Orcish. So quiet she almost did not say it aloud, she whispered, "I love you." Warren's arms tightened. In the same language, accented but clear, he answered, "I know. I have been waiting for you to tell yourself." She turned in his arms, found his mouth in the darkness. The kiss was gentle and fierce all at once, 3 years of grief and loneliness, and gradual healing distilled into a single point of contact. When they broke apart, she was crying, and Warren wiped her tears with his thumbs. "I am sorry it took so long," she said. "Do not be. The best things are worth waiting for." He kissed her forehead. "And we have time now." They had time. They used it slowly, building something real in the space between his cabin and her trading post. Warren taught her to shoot a rifle and read weather patterns. She taught him Orcish poetry and how to haggle in Sular. They spent his off-season weeks at the cabin and her busy weeks at the post, learning the rhythms of each other's lives. Winter came again, but this time Hessa was not alone. Warren stayed at the post for weeks at a time, helping Garrett with repairs and keeping Hessa company during the long, quiet stretches. In the evenings they spoke in Orcish, Warren's fluency improving until they could have real conversations. Debates about philosophy and arguments about the best way to prepare rabbit stew. I never thought I would speak my mother tongue again, Hessa told him one night, curled up in his lap before the fireplace. I thought I had lost it along with everything else. You just needed someone to speak it with, Warren said, running his fingers through her dark hair. Someone who wanted to hear the real you, not the translated version. You learned an entire language for me. Small price. He tilted her chin up, met her eyes. You are worth considerably more than grammar study. In the spring, Warren asked her to marry him. He did it in Orcish, formal and grammatically perfect, kneeling on the trading post floor with a ring he had carved from antler bone. Hessa said yes in the same language, then in Common, then in Drevik and Suler and Karish, until they were both laughing and she was kissing him between languages. They married in the summer at the crossroads, a simple ceremony with Garrett as witness and a wandering priestess who asked no questions about species. Hessa wore green silk that matched her skin and wildflowers in her hair. Warren wore his best clothes and could not stop smiling. When the priestess asked for their vows, they spoke them in Orcish, Warren's accent still present but his conviction absolute. I promise to see you always, he said. To hear what you do not say and love what you do, to be patient and present and yours. Hessa's voice shook but held. I promise to be real with you, to speak my truth and trust you with my silences, to be brave and honest and yours. They kissed to scattered applause from the traders who had gathered to watch, and Hessa realized she was not afraid anymore. Not of being seen, not of speaking her heart, not of the future unfurling before them. They spent the summer at Warren's cabin, which became their cabin. Hessa continued her translation work, but remotely now, handling correspondence and traveling to the post only for major negotiations. Warren adjusted his trap lines, staying closer to home. They built a life from quiet mornings and shared work, from conversations in Orcish and long, contented silences. In the autumn, Hessa woke one morning and realized she could not remember the last time someone had asked if she was fine. Not because no one cared, but because the people around her, Warren especially, saw past the rehearsed answers to the truth underneath. She no longer needed 4 languages to deflect concern. She had one language to speak love, and a man who understood every word. She found Warren splitting wood behind the cabin, his movements efficient and practiced. He looked up when she approached, smiled, set down the axe. I need to tell you something, she said in Orcish. Warren gave her his full attention, the same steady presence he had offered from the beginning. I am listening. I am fine, Hessa said, and this time it was true. Actually fine, not rehearsed, not deflecting. I am happy, I am whole. I am yours and I am fine. Warren's face softened. He crossed to her, pulled her into his arms, held her like she was something precious. In Orcish, he said, I know. I can hear it in every word you do not say. They stood there in the autumn sunlight, the creek rushing beside them and the forest rustling overhead, 2 people who had found each other across the distance of languages and grief. Hessa had spent years translating for others, building bridges of words so different people could understand each other. But Warren had taught her that the deepest understanding needed no translation. It lived in the space between words, in the silences that spoke louder than any language. That night, lying in their bed with Warren's hand over her heart, Hessa spoke in Orcish about her brother for the first time without crying. She told Warren the good memories, Dravik's laugh, his terrible cooking, the way he had always believed she could do anything. Warren listened without trying to fix or comfort, just bearing witness. When she finished, he said, He would be glad you are happy. I think he would like you, Hessa said. He always wanted me to find someone who saw me, not just what I could do. Then I wish I could have met him. To thank him for having such a remarkable sister. It was the perfect thing to say. Not too much, not too little. just right, like everything Warren did. Winter settled over the forest, and with it came the deep quiet Warren had promised. They spent their days in comfortable routine. Warren tending trap lines, Hessa translating documents by lamplight, both of them meeting in the evenings to cook and talk and exist together. Sometimes they spoke Orcish, sometimes common, often a comfortable mix of both. The language mattered less than the understanding underneath. On the anniversary of Dravik's death, Hessa woke to find Warren already up, standing on the porch watching the north. When she joined him, he handed her tea without a word, just stood beside her while she watched the mountains and remembered. After a long while, she said in Orcish, "Thank you for knowing what I needed." "You needed to not be alone," Warren said. "That is easy." "It is not easy. But you make it look that way." He wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "You do the same for me, every day." Spring came again, the second spring of their marriage. The forest exploded with green and birdsong, and Hessa discovered she was pregnant. She told Warren in Orcish, the words spilling out in a nervous rush. He picked her up and spun her around, laughing, then set her down gently and kissed her until they were both breathless. "A baby," he said in wonder. "Our baby." "Are you happy?" Hessa asked, suddenly uncertain. Warren cupped her face, met her eyes with that steady certainty she had come to rely on. "I am happier than I have words for in any language." Their daughter arrived in winter, a squalling green-skinned baby with tiny tusks and her father's gray eyes. They named her Lyra, and she transformed their quiet cabin into something noisier and infinitely more precious. Warren was a natural father, patient and gentle, and completely unafraid of diapers or midnight crying. Hessa watched him rock their daughter to sleep, singing soft Orcish lullabies he had learned phonetically, and felt her heart expand to sizes she had not known were possible. "You learned lullabies too?" she asked one night, exhausted and amazed. Warren looked up from Lyra's sleeping face. Of course. She should grow up hearing her mother's language, both her languages. "You are a strange man," Hessa said, then immediately regretted the words. They felt too much like every other story, every other easy phrase, but Warren just smiled. "And you are an extraordinary woman." "Seems like a good match." Lyra grew, and the cabin grew with her. Warren built additions, a larger bedroom and a workspace for Hessa's translations. They talked about moving closer to the trading post, to civilization, but neither truly wanted to leave the forest. This was home now, the place where they had built their life from silence and understanding. On Lyra's second birthday, they took her to the crossroads for the celebration. Garrett threw a party at the trading post, inviting traders and locals and anyone who wanted to come. There was food and music, and Lyra toddled around charming everyone with her mix of Orcish and common baby talk. Hessa stood at the edge of the celebration, watching her daughter laugh, and felt Warren's presence beside her before he spoke. "Thinking about something?" he asked in Orcish. "About how different this is from 3 years ago," Hessa said. "When I stood in this same spot and lied in 4 languages. You do not lie anymore." "No, you made that impossible." Warren took her hand, laced their fingers together. "You made it impossible. I just paid attention." "You did more than pay attention. You learned an entire language. You saw past every wall I built. You waited for me to be ready. It was not hard." Warren watched Lyra, his expression soft. "You were worth every moment." Hessa leaned into him, breathing in his familiar scent of pine and wood smoke. "I love you, in every language but especially ours." "I know," Warren said, and she could hear the smile in his voice. "You tell me every day, even when you are not speaking." They stood there together, watching their daughter play and the traders dance and the world turn around them. Hessa thought about the woman she had been, rehearsing "I am fine like armor," and the woman she had become, fluent in truth and love and the silence between words. Warren had learned her language, but more than that, he had learned her. And in doing so, he had taught her to be known. The party wound down as evening came. They gathered Lyra, said their goodbyes, and began the long walk home through the spring forest. Lyra fell asleep on Warren's shoulders, and Hessa walked beside him, her hand in his, thinking about all the languages she had learned and the one that mattered most. At the cabin, they put Lyra to bed and sat together on the porch, watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. The creek rushed beside them, constant and soothing. Warren pulled Hessa close, and she rested her head on his shoulder. "Are you fine?" he asked in Orcish, the question carrying layers of meaning it would never have in any other language. Hessa smiled, turned to kiss him softly. "I am better than fine. I am home." Warren's arms tightened around her. "So am I." They sat in comfortable silence, the kind that needed no words, that spoke volumes in the space between heartbeats. Hessa had spent years learning languages, becoming fluent in translation and deflection, and the careful art of being useful. But Warren had taught her the most important language of all, the one spoken in silence and presence, in steady hands and patient hearts, in the kind of love that saw everything and stayed anyway. She looked up at the stars, thought about Dravik and the avalanche, and all the years of grief she had carried like stones. The weight was still there, would always be there, but it no longer crushed her. Warren had helped her learn to carry it differently, to make space for joy alongside sorrow, to be fine and not fine all at once without needing to rehearse the answer. "What are you thinking?" Warren asked, his voice low and content. Hessa answered in Orcish, the words coming easily now. "That I never have to rehearse anything with you, that you speak all my languages, even the ones without words, that I found home in a person, not a place." "I think the same about you," Warren said. "Every day." Inside the cabin, Lyra made a small sound in her sleep. They listened together, waiting to see if she would wake, but she settled back into dreams. Warren stood, offered Hessa his hand, pulled her up and into his arms. "Come to bed," he said in Common, then in Orcish, then in the wordless language of a kiss that tasted like coming home. They went inside together, closing the door on the night. The cabin glowed warm with lamplight, filled with the quiet sounds of their life. Lyra breathing softly, the fire crackling low, the ever-present rush of the creek outside. Hessa looked around at their home, at the man she loved and the daughter they had made, and felt the truth settle into her bones. She was fine. Actually, truly fine. Not rehearsed, not translated, not deflected. Just fine in the most complete sense of the word, in the language Warren had learned to speak, the language of her whole, honest self. And that, more than anything, was worth all the words in all the languages she would ever know.